Well, it finally happened. Much to my dismay, I am under a total and complete lockdown for at least 30 days, probably longer. I've been holding out hope that my state, Florida, that I live in, that I've always lived in, that I hopefully always will live in, was not going to have a statewide lockdown. But early on, I was very concerned, because I would consider that New York, California, and Florida were probably going to be the three big hotspots for this virus in terms of numbers of cases, because, well, frankly, we have the biggest populations. And New York and California have taken some pretty extreme measures, but which are both, by the way, Democratic states, and I'll get to the reason why the parties matter here in a second. But our governor, our state, which has a Republican governor, Ron Desantis, who was, he was a member of the Freedom Caucus in Congress. Remember those guys? They used to be, arch conservatives that were very, in favor of individual liberty, and then they kind of became, just Trump, always Trumpers. They would defend whatever Trump did. That's kind of what their new role is. But considering that DeSantis came from that and has that legacy of being, hey, I'm supposed to like freedom and stuff, you would think that he would, as he has demonstrated, be resistant to, creating a police state, which is what you do if you order all your people to stay in their homes, because the only way you enforce that is by sending the police after them and arresting them and throwing them in prison. That is how you would enforce such an order. And that's a pretty authoritarian sort of system. And yes, you could say, oh, well, it's temporary, this is an emergency. Well, there have been a lot of emergencies, throughout history. And normally, the way you solve a crisis is not through a police state. Because in my opinion, you're going to create more problems than you solve potentially by, rather than just encouraging people to stay home and say, hey, you really, really need to stay home so that you don't get yourself sick or anybody else. If you start sending armed thugs after them, who potentially will shoot people, or again lock them in a cage for some undeterminate amount of time, because DeSantis hasn't set any kind of a penalty officially yet. So I'd rather he would have issued, maybe a long time ago, a stay-at-home advisory for people in Florida, certainly in particular counties, but making it mandatory like this, I think, creates a lot of problems from an implementation standpoint. And this is why I argued against the federal government not too long ago doing a national lockdown. Why I thought that would be suicidal is because it would be way too difficult to manage, way too difficult to enforce. And so therefore, if there are videos showing up on social media of people having parties in remote areas that aren't being broken up by the cops and that aren't resulting in people being hauled off to the COOF camps like we saw in China, well, then that's going to discredit your whole endeavor, and so nobody's going to follow the lockdown then. Because, of course, there aren't enough cops in the whole country to keep us all locked in our homes. The only way that you can enforce a lockdown and actually achieve it is if people are scared enough to the point of being arrested that the vast majority of them do stay in their house, and you only have to make examples of the few that actually do venture out. Now, the media surely is going to be rejoicing at this because they have been prodding the governor to act in this way for a number of days or weeks, and the pressure has really been intensifying on him. And again, this is where the partisan divide seems to come in here. The left from the beginning have been in favor of locking down the whole country, it would seem. At least I shouldn't say the far left. The far left are very good on this. The far left understand that what the moderate left, let's call them, the mainstream left, is calling for is a police state. And police states, leftists typically are the kinds of people who rebel against police states and wage revolutions. At least in theory. It doesn't always work out that way in practice, because oftentimes left-wingers get into office and, like now, they are the ones who implement the police states. But anyway, the far left in America is not in power, so that doesn't really matter. But the mainstream left certainly has been doing everything they can to I guess, drape an iron curtain across the United States, across all 50 states. Now, they didn't get the national lockdown, and I'm pretty confident that at least for now, Trump is still solid on that he's not going to do that. But what he's doing, it seems, is pressuring governors from behind the scenes. Because it seems pretty clear that the White House was also pressuring DeSantis to lock down his whole state because there was, I forget which doctor, maybe it was Birx, who came out and said basically, hey, Florida's going to have a very serious problem unless they lock down right now, and we expect that they're going to do that before Monday. And this was before DeSantis announced anything. I believe that was yesterday, during the press conference that came out. And so there's definitely been a lot of top-down pressure applied to DeSantis. Of course, like I was saying, the whole media is just in love with this whole idea of a lockdown. They've been saying how he's derelict of his duty. The same things they've been saying about Trump, because he hasn't been tough enough on this. And again, Trump, I think, has made a lot of mistakes and a lot of things wrong, which some things I give him a pass for because there's no playbook as far as this goes. So you're not going to be perfect on it. But I think that the White House is still making a lot of fatal errors, like in saying that people who are not symptomatic don't need to be tested. That's utter nonsense. Or that people shouldn't be wearing masks. Again, there's very destructive messaging to be putting out there. So what does this mean for the broader context of this whole story? Of course, today the United States confirmed over 200,000 cases. That's a big milestone. It wasn't too long ago that it was 200,000 cases in the entire world. Now it's over 900,000 cases in the entire world. And Trump's tone has changed too, from going, hey, let's try and be optimistic. Let's think about, wouldn't it be nice if we could be open by Easter? Not even saying that we should, because obviously we could, and that would have been crazy. But he's saying, wouldn't that be nice? Trying to be soft and tell people that, hey, let's try and get through this. Now it's like, no, things are going to get really bad. The next couple months, they're going to be very painful. Those are the words used by the president now. And, that while his words do not change reality, it is significant to me that you see this vacillating approach back and forth. And who knows, maybe Trump will go more dovish again. I guess I should start monitoring this based on that, whether Trump is being dovish or hawkish on the virus. And we've gone back and forth. At first, he was very dovish. Then, for a little while, he was very hawkish. And then he went back to being a soft dove again. And now he's back being more hawkish. And so I would expect that, getting back to the lockdowns and things like that, that if the governor of a state, such as Ron Desantis, who was very opposed to the idea of locking down an entire state, eventually buckled to the pressure, I wouldn't be surprised if, a majority of states ended up being locked down throughout, during the course of this whole epidemic. Of course, I use the term epidemic to refer to the outbreak in the United States, which is, not directly referring to the global pandemic. So it should be obvious to everyone at this point that things will never be the same. There's not going to be a V-shaped recovery like all the folks on Wall Street love to dream about, like they magically got in 2008, even though they did not deserve that, not to get into relitigating 2008 again. But this is really nothing like 2008. It's much worse. And I expected this next crash to be worse than 2008, but I didn't expect that it would be this bad. I mean, this is far more apocalyptic than anything I could have ever imagined. And the stock market still doesn't seem to have internalized that. It's very funny, these people on the internet and in real life even, who still stick to this tired old idea that the stock market is a forward indicator of the economy. It's absolute nonsense. The stock market is not smarter than the average individual. And the fact that we're significantly higher now than we were last week should be clear evidence of that, because I think that the administration has telegraphed to everyone that things, are much worse. Last week when the stock market was down, the president was, not as hawkish as he is now on this virus. But of course, it's not to say that stocks are doing great. We did have that bear market rally for the past couple days, and it seems like that's over. Although today, looking at the numbers, you'll notice that the 2450 level did end up holding, and that was support before on the way down, and that is support again. And we bounced up and off of the 2450 level last time for a couple of days. Before eventually busting through and then going all the way down, I believe, below 2200. And so, obviously, I think there's going to be a retest of that low at some point, and we may not break out this time, or break lower, I should say, but I wouldn't be surprised. And certainly at some point, that low is going to be taken out, because despite all of the government's meddlings here in trying to inject all this money into the economy and to prop up all these businesses, pretty much every company on the S&P, which is going to be in distress because of this. Despite all that, just pressing the pause button on the American economy, on American society, is not something you can do without doing a lot of damage. As I've said before, bailouts only work if there's a couple of people who you're trying to bail out and you take from everyone else to give stuff to them, okay? Because even if you're not directly taxing other people to get this bailout money, there still has to be a redistribution of scarce resources. You can't make resources not scarce. Okay, money is not scarce because you can create as much of it as you want, but the goods and services that money can buy is scarce. So in bailing out, the firms who got bailed out in 2008, the banks and all that, what the government effectively did, to the extent that they had any impact on the real economy, was they transferred wealth from the vast majority, from pretty much everyone in society to the folks that got bailed out. Okay, but if you're trying to bail out everyone in the entire economy, then that doesn't work, because you can't transfer wealth from everyone to everyone. If we're all bankrupt, nobody can be bailed out. And if you think that the U.S. economy, has any chance of recovering within this year, with it having a strong positive quarter to the point to where we only have a single-digit loss for the year end, which is what, by the way, all the major firms are now predicting. They expect, like a double-digit decline in GDP growth a double-digit decline in GDP, meaning negative growth this quarter, but then they expect, I think, the third and the fourth quarter to both be positive. And so for the year, the loss of GDP will be in the single digits. I'm telling you right now, if you shut down the three largest states in the union, plus many, many, many more, you're not going to have a V-shaped recovery. You are not going to have a decline in GDP in the single digits. This is not going to be a brief and sharp recession. This is going to be a deep and long depression, because this crisis is not just about how much the Fed is willing to do. It's about the efficacy of the Fed's actions. And what we've seen every year since 2008 is that every time that the market starts to slip, the Fed has to come back with more and more extreme solutions to try and get the market to go back up. As sort of a microcosm of what they eventually will do to the dollar itself, the Fed has been debasing, its tools. So all I can say is I hope that you all have some kind of useful, marketable skill that you will be able to use to produce things of value in our new economy, because this old, highly financialized and fragile system seems to be broken forever. Now, obviously, I'm a little biased today because I'm feeling more pessimistic because this is directly impacting me, but it's impossible to go out in the streets and to see, at 5 o'clock that there's no traffic, no heavy traffic, I should say, that there is no normal commuter traffic, and that to think of that and extrapolate across the entire United States, that highways across America are, if not empty, sparsely populated. There's no way that you can look at that and think that we can just turn the spigot back on. This isn't a matter of priming the pump. You see, the pump has been smashed in with a sledgehammer and then melted down in a scrapyard. By the end of this whole operation, all we will have left is iron ore. We will have back the basic building blocks of an economy, and we will have to build one from scratch. I mean, look at the essential service providers, even the people who are allowed to work. The farms around me, you look at them, and the fields are full, waiting to be picked. And yet they're not. Why? Because even with all this panic buying and everything, there's been a net decline in the demand for all these foodstuffs. Think about it. With all the restaurants closed, sure, people are buying a lot more from grocery stores, but they're not buying more food on net. Or at least, if they are, it's not the folks who tend to service different parts of the economy, like the restaurants. Those sorts of farmers and ranchers are seeing a significant hit. Because, even if you're still allowed to work, when the entire economy shuts down, there's going to be if there's less production, there's going to be less demand. You can't consume more than you produce. The only way all the food that's grown every year gets consumed, which, by the way, it doesn't because of things like price supports and the Farm Bill and the like, there's actually a lot more food produced every year than is consumed, and it's bought up and sent to third world countries to try and prop up the price here in the U.S. But leaving that aside, my point is that everyone is hurt by this, and not just a little bit. The spectrum here of how this is impacting businesses and individuals is either severely damaging to lethal. So that's about all I have to say. I'm going to be trapped in this box that you call a house for at least 30 days, probably longer, and I'm not looking forward to that. So hopefully you folks will keep me company. And if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.